Hello indie gaming fans, today's game is for all you fans out there of games that you do not know how to pronounce. I'm the X-Hardcore Gamer, and today I'm going to be reviewing XEL? XEL? CEL? Something like that.
My god, look at her butt! This looks like the thing that Cheryl was talking about. It looks super gross though. I bet that arachnobot won't let us get that junk in her trunk willingly.
All kidding aside, even multiple characters in the game pronounce it in different ways, so it's really hard to know what is 100% the way to say it. So from this point forward, I'm just going to refer to the game as XEL. XEL starts off right away with multiple trigger warnings. The game tackles themes like suicide, arachnophobia, dementia, animal cruelty, body horror, and it features flickering lights. XEL is an epic 3D sci-fi fantasy action adventure game where you explore the mysterious world of XEL. You play as the main character who has crash landed on this mysterious world and has no memory of where she came from or even who she is. Not even knowing her own name, upon running into one of the inhabitants of the world, she is given the name Reid, and that's what she's referred to going forward. You soon find out that XEL is a spacecraft that is a living planet full of refugees. Reid befriends these refugees and even meets the Elder, who's been around since the planet has existed. He stopped counting after the age of 100, but also mentions that time passes differently while on XEL. Unfortunately, XEL is about to suffer the same fate as the original home planet, as it's about to explode and everybody on it will die. So now you not only have to figure out who you are and where you came from, but you're also trying to save this floating spacecraft before it explodes. Reid has a stone that is lodged into her skull, and it gives her problems as she starts to explore this world. She gets blinding headaches and realizes that she can interact with this world in different ways than she expected. While initially this just means the ability to be able to save your game and just giving a storyline reason for it, later on you will also discover that you can manipulate time. This means that on top of being a typical adventure game where you're going to be doing some exploring and hacking up enemies with your sword, you'll also be able to manipulate time to be able to solve some puzzles. No, this doesn't break down into a game of Tetris, but instead is more of the environmental puzzle variety where you need to be able to figure out how to get to the next area. A perfect example of this would be the fact that you walk up to a bridge that in the present time is crumbled and no longer passable, but now you can travel back in time to when that bridge still existed so that you may cross it. Not all puzzles rely on the time mechanic, and sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out which switch to flip or even carrying different items such as batteries to the right power sources. The puzzles do start off a bit simplistic, but this is just a matter of getting you used to the game's mechanics, and as you progress further into the game they get a bit more complex and therefore more enjoyable to solve. The game has been described as being Zelda-like, but I do feel that's a bit unfair of a comparison. I feel that there's a definite distinction between the earlier 2D Zelda titles and the later 3D ones, and XEL seems to be a bit of a mash of the two. While you still have the overhead view of the earlier style Zelda games, it also has the lock-on targeting for the combat of the later 3D ones. While obviously it does also borrow from the exploration elements of the Zelda series, and you do get new gadgets that help you both in combat and to get to new areas, I feel that people trying to expect something like Zelda is going to be a bit too high of an expectation, and the game should be judged for what it is. I feel that the time-hopping element to the puzzles definitely gives it its own unique feel, and that was where I had the most fun, and not necessarily with the combat itself, although that wasn't too bad either. The controls are pretty straightforward, where you're obviously going to move around with the left analog stick and then use the B button to swing your sword. I admit this was a little weird to get used to at first, as I would have expected it to be A or X, but eventually you do get used to it and you just play along with it. There is currently no way to change the controls at all or do any kind of key rebinding, but the developer has said that they are looking into it, and it's possible it will be added in a later update. I believe this was done to make it separate from the A button, which is used as your main interact button when you find items in the environment, and then you use the X and the Y button for the gadgets that you find along the way. Early examples of these gadgets are the Zap Trap, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a trap that you leave that will stun your enemies as they are electrocuted, and also a web slinging mechanic mechanic to make you swing to different areas. Side note, one aspect I really enjoyed about this is that the zap trap was not just for battles, but would also be used in puzzles as well. Since it gives a burst of electricity, there are actually points in the game where something needs to be powered, and you could use that instead of trying to find a battery. The rest of the controls just consist of locking on with the left trigger, blocking with the right trigger, and then using the right bumper as a dash or a sidestep when you're locked on. As you kill enemies and open up different chests, you'll also get different materials that you can then use to make upgrades to your weapons and other items. There's also a cooking mechanic that whenever you find a campfire, you can use different recipes to cook foods that have different stat boosts. For those of you that like to skip all the warnings that show up in the beginning, it also gives you the heads up that this game does not have an autosave. Everything is done manually, but you can't save at any point that you'd like. You have to find specific checkpoints. The checkpoints are rather plentiful, but they aren't everywhere, so you do sometimes have to be careful, especially as you advance later on into the game. Once you die, you just load that checkpoint and it's right where you left off from there. While I can definitely say that I had fun while playing XL, I can also say that my enjoyment, and possibly others as well, will be hampered by the graphics and performance. I was playing this game on PC with an RTX 2060 video card, and while it would tell me that the game was running anywhere from 120 to 165 frames per second, it never quite felt like it was running anywhere near that. Everything had a very choppy look and feel to it. The only graphical options that it gave you were just the usual presets of having low, medium, high, etc., and nothing really specific within that. Whether I had it set to low or ultra, it would always have the same performance issues and would keep the same high frame rate. It did allow me to change the resolution, but it wouldn't allow me to change the refresh rate or have any kind of a frame rate limit. Changing from the 2K resolution to 1080p, and also switching from 165Hz to 60Hz directly on my monitor settings did seem to help, but not by very much. This kind of leads me to believe that it's not the actual performance that's going on, just something with how the engine itself operates. It seems to be that all of this relates to how the camera moves in-game. Even when I would have my perceived stuttering, the frame rate would seem nice and high, but whenever it was a static camera, the game would look like it was running nice and smoothly. On top of all the stuttering issues, there's also some pop-up where enemies, objects, and shadows will just appear out of nowhere and sometimes even disappear. There's also no effect to make anything transparent or disappear at all whenever it's in your line of sight, so there were multiple instances of objects blocking your view. While everything does have a nice cartoony look to it, it's hard to admire it when you have all these issues plaguing it. The soundtrack to XL has a more ambient style, so it's going to be something that you're not really going to notice that it's there unless you're actually really listening hard. It's not that it's bad per se, it's just the style of the music. It wasn't anything I loved or hated, it was just kind of there, and there were times that it almost didn't feel like it was matching what was going on screen. So in summary, no matter what you decide to call this game, you have a cringy story with a stuttering camera and some bugs that hopefully will get fixed, but we're not sure if they will. And so you have a fun gameplay experience, but it might be a little frustrating to get through it.
Oh, the heat. It's too much. That means the Paradox engine must be this way.
Thank you so much for supporting clickbait-free content here at I Dream of Indie. We would now like to take a moment to shout out our brave indie warriors and legends that help to support this channel through channel memberships. At the Indie Warriors tier, we have Bill, Adriana Amato, CJR, Julian Kolbis, Jesse, Ray Lynn, Marky Mint, Dave Hart, Peekaboo, Lex Noyle, Christian Cruz, PSC, Solaru C, and Chic Geek. At the Indie Legends tier, we have Nathan Moore, Skeptism, Mitchell Hall, Jen Rose, Chris Jackson, Mr. W, Blue Francis 14, The Beefarinis, Business Cody, Chiron, Jace Glover, King of the Hatch, Ophidian Mind, Lord Metroid, C. Coil, and Larkison. Thank you so much for all that you do for independent developers, publishers, and for I Dream of Indie. Everybody else, head down to the description box below. Let's defeat the gaming echo chamber and bring a voice to the voiceless ones in gaming.